Welcome back to another Christmas edition of Secrets from the Ancient Past. Thanks for joining us. My goal is to show you part of the Christmas story that you can't always see when you just read the accounts as they're written in Matthew and Luke. You can only see part of the story if you connect with the land of the Bible. But once you see the land, you'll understand so much more about all of the Bible's passages, including the Christmas story. So join me as we visit one of the most familiar and most loved stories in all the Bible. In the process, maybe we'll learn something that will change the way we celebrate Christmas and the way we live as followers of Jesus. In this third episode, we're going to see what dominated the Christmas story, though almost no readers of the Bible ever see it. But that's not because we weren't told about the one person who dominates the Christmas story. Matthew and Luke both tried to tell us this fact as they opened up the story of Christmas. For Matthew, one of the two writers, of course, that tells us about Christmas, he opens up what we call chapter 2 with the news that Herod the Great was the king of Judea. But Luke, who is the other Christmas journalist, he gets to that fact even faster. In fact, in Luke's gospel, it's the very first detail Luke tells us about the entire Jesus story, that Herod was king of Judea. So if Matthew and Luke both started their accounts of the birth of Jesus by telling us about the most powerful, most frightening man in all of Judea, then maybe we should put a pause button on the journey Mary and Joseph were taking to Bethlehem, the part of the story we know so well, and take a look at the man known to history as Herod the Great. Before he was known as Herod the Great, Herod, son of Antipater, gained a quick reputation as an ambitious young man hungry for power. That ambition served him well. By the time he was in his mid-30s, Herod had been appointed king of Judea by the Roman Senate, although another king was actually ruling from Jerusalem. With the help of Roman forces, Herod circled Israel and eventually took Jerusalem. He was firmly in charge of Judea inside of 2 years, though he would never be fully accepted by the Jewish people. This was due in part to his legendary cruelty. In one unforgettable and unforgivable incident, Herod attacked the farming community of Arbel. A defenseless group of families from Arbel took refuge in the caves along the cliffs overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Ever the ingenious builder, Herod designed transports for his soldiers, lowered them to safe ground below, and there they slaughtered the adults and threw the children to their deaths on the rocks below. It was with several incredible building projects that Herod made his mark on history, for his engineering genius is what earned him the moniker of Herod the Great. On the coast of the Mediterranean, Herod built a new international port city from scratch. This included a man-made harbor that utilized underwater construction of what is now called hydraulic cement. Alongside the port was an arena for horse racing and Olympic-style games, and a theater that has come back into use in recent years. Herod constructed amazing palaces for himself throughout the land, including the amazing fortress he built atop Masada on the shoreline of the Dead Sea. Archaeological research tells us that his palaces at Caesarea, Samaria, Jericho, Jerusalem, Machaerus, and Masada were stocked with imported food, wine, and lavish living quarters. Swimming pools and gardens were the norm for Herod's building projects, even in the desert. At Caesarea, his freshwater swimming pool jutted out into the Mediterranean Sea. The freshwater came into the city by the way of impressive Roman-styled aqueducts. Fully committed to the Roman Empire, Herod built at least 3 temples to honor the Roman emperor as God on earth, including one such temple that was prominently positioned at Caesarea's harbor. By his own design, therefore, the first landmark international travelers would see as they crossed the horizon was a temple declaring that the emperor was Lord over the land of Israel. And yet, as strange as it might seem, Herod's greatest building project was the temple in Jerusalem, which declared the nation's complete devotion to the God of the Bible. For all of his secular ways and his ties with the Romans, Herod considered himself to be a Jew. The task of rebuilding the temple included expanding the Temple Mount platform, filling in the central valley of the city, and working closely with religious leaders to construct the greatest temple that ever stood in Jerusalem. It surpassed even the glory of Solomon's temple. Personally, Herod was one of the most paranoid leaders the world has ever met. Fearing a rebellion in his own circle of leadership and from his own sons, Herod executed a shocking number of family members and friends. A partial list details the execution of his favorite wife, her mother, her grandfather, and her brother, and 3 of Herod's sons. Herod's personal bodyguard constituted a small army. The fortresses he built were strategically placed to protect him from an attack from Rome or from his father's homeland in Idumea. One of the largest of those fortresses was a man-made mountain just 3 miles from Bethlehem. Towers on this fortress, which he named the Herodian, gave lookouts an unparalleled view of the land. More than 1,000 soldiers were said to have stood guard here, watching over their paranoid king. As it always was, the palace at this fortress was luxurious. The swimming pool was so large it had small boats in it. As his death approached, Herod gave orders to transform the entire structure into his own burial site, and his wishes were carried out. Readers of the Christmas story know that in one of his last actions, Herod ordered the slaughter of all infant boys in Bethlehem and the surrounding villages. He had a fear that the promised Messiah might have been born thanks to the visiting Magi and the scripture that had put a target on Bethlehem's toddlers. Warned in a dream, Mary and Joseph had hurried Jesus to safety, thus escaping Herod's clutch. But for decades to come, all of Bethlehem was left to grieve underneath the shadow of Herod's glorious tomb that towered above them. I'm always overwhelmed with what the land can tell us about the context of all the stories in the Bible. And never is that more profoundly evident than when you look at the Christmas story and you also see what the land can tell us about it through the ruins of everything related to Herod the Great. Now think about what this tells us about Jesus, because the contrast between Herod the Great and Jesus is absolutely stunning. Herod had everything. Jesus had nothing all the way through his life. Herod was all-powerful. Mary and Joseph, they were powerless. Jesus was a newborn during that beginning stage, of course, and completely dependent on others for his needs, completely powerless. Herod had what was probably the world's largest palace in that day in his culture, and it was just one of several palaces. Jesus was born in a cave. Admittedly, that cave had been transformed into a place to shelter animals, but if you had seen it, it would have looked like a cave. It looked like a place where animals stayed. And that's a humble place to be born for any culture, for any person in any time of history. Hard to think of a more humble way to begin life. And it's hard to think of a greater contrast to who Herod the Great was. So here's a question. Why are we, you and me, celebrating the birth of Jesus in a way that Herod the Great would love and in a way that Jesus wouldn't even recognize? How did such a holy day turn into such a cash-centered holiday? How did Santa Claus take the place of Christ? And what would it take to take us all back to Christmas? I'll leave you with that thought today and invite you to join us again next week. It'll give us a lot to chew on. And next week, we'll finally get to Bethlehem. In the meantime, I hope you'll share the word with your friends, family members, your folks, the connections you have on social media about this videocast, this podcast with all the video. I'd like for more people to know the secrets from the ancient past. So turn them on to secretsfromtheancientpast.com, or if they're into a podcasting platform like iTunes, just search for the Secrets from the Ancient Past. And we can all walk to Christmas together. Listen, thank you again for joining us. It's an honor to have you on this journey. And I hope as you're getting ready for Christmas, it's going to be the greatest Christ-centered Christmas that you've ever known. I'm Andy Cook.